Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and I'm here today to start a deep dive reading vlog with A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ní Ghríofa. And I first heard about this book when I was watching a Zoom conversation between Emma Donoghue and Doireann Ní Ghríofa that happened, I think it was in 2021. So it was after the book was published in Canada, 2020. So maybe in 2020, 2021, I'm not sure. But Doireann read from this, and it was transporting hearing her speak the poem in Irish and talk about the book and talk about her experience of writing this. So this is, as someone wrote in the comments, a feminist interpretation of, or a feminist book about motherhood, about this particular poem, a lament poem that was written in the 1700s by someone who sounds like an incredible woman. So I read the first chapter, and it starts off kind of describing the how the poem crept up on Doireann. So like how she first encountered it as a child and then encountered it again as a teenager, and then how it came to her again as an adult. And that is just something that I always am fascinated by, the way that when artists become inspired or kind of obsessed with something, and the way it creeps into your life. So in this case, she just saw a road sign that with the word on it of a place, and she recognized that place, and she was like, where is that place? Where have I heard that word? Kilcrea. It just kept nagging at her until she finally had to go and like look it up, and she realized it was in the poem. So yeah, and she's describing being a mother who's trying to make write poetry while also raising her children, and that kind of push-pull, which is super interesting to me because obviously I do the same thing with my work, trying to balance all the things and have all the things at the same time as much as possible. So yeah, as soon as I started reading it, I knew I should probably do a deep dive vlog on this because it's going to be a book that I definitely purchase. I think I need to buy a copy and then get really ingrained in and you know, just break down chapter by chapter. So the first chapter is called A Female Text, and it's, you know, looking at so many different parts. I really like the way she assembles the chapter. So there's a little bit about her life. You get a little bit of her history of who she is. You get a little bit of analysis of the text and what the author of the poem experienced. So you're getting like many layers within one chapter, and it's not that long. It's 25 pages. So yeah, really liking it, and I will check in with you after each chapter and give you a deep dive into it. There are 17 chapters, so there will be 17 check-ins. And I will try not to read it too fast, like to skip through without being able to check in with each one with you. All right, so I will check in again when I've read a bit more. Hey Hey y'all, so I finished chapter 2 of A Ghost in the Throat. So chapter 2 is called A Liquid Echo, and our author is talking about her experience donating her breast milk to a milk bank where they distribute that milk to premature babies or babies who have just come out of surgery of some kind. This is a very quick chapter, so there's not a ton to kind of go into around it, but she's very much talking about the experience of carrying babies and then having feeding them, breastfeeding them, and how pregnancy is this strange hybridized experience where your body is not really your body. She also talks about a lack of desire, which I think she mentions briefly in the first chapter, where she feels like her desire, sexual desire, has been eliminated. Like she doesn't feel it at all. It's not in her body. And that once she stops breastfeeding, it returns. And then subsequently she becomes pregnant again with her 4th child. So that's kind of interesting. But so it's a really short chapter. It really just talks about her experience with the breast milk bank and like the routine of that, the kind of repetition of the cleaning the house, looking after the kids, pumping her milk, getting that milk to the milk bank, and then the return of her desire when she stops pumping the milk, and then subsequently becoming pregnant again. So not talking too much more about the poem itself, but more about this particular stage in her life of parenting. So that was chapter 2. Hey everybody. So I just finished the 3rd chapter of A Ghost in the Throat, which is called A Breath. No, I already forgot it. I just looked at it. To Breathe Elsewhere. And Doireann is talking about the translation of the poem and how she worked on it and the kind of deliberation it took to get through it, and her dissatisfaction with the translations that she had read previously. And this is translating it from Irish into English, and like feeling this sense of compulsion to try her own translating, and then finding it very difficult to achieve the level, like to give the words the expression that she found from them herself. Oh, I always have great timing with the garbage trucks. And I wanted to just read you this little beginning, which she's talking about how the poem was passed down. So a body holds so much beyond the visible. Before it was ever transcribed or translated, Cuinind ard Ulagoher, which I do not know if that's how it's pronounced, was preserved in oral folklore, reverberating through a succession of female bodies from female mouth to female ear over years and years and years. I really like that idea, like thinking about words as breath, words as becoming a part of your body. So coming from your body, but also moving through your body as you speak them. I think that's really, really beautiful and interesting. So yeah, that was chapter 3. Hey everyone, it is so dark right now. I can't, like you can't tell how dark it is because I'm standing right beside the window, but it is ridiculously dark. Okay, so I just wanted to check in about the next chapter of A Ghost in the Throat, which is chapter 4, in the milking parlor. This was actually a longer chapter, and it covers the birth of Doireann's daughter. She's born a bit prematurely because of a complication with the placenta. So the placenta is starting to deteriorate, and they discover this through an ultrasound. And so very quickly they realize the baby's in distress and perform an emergency C-section, and the baby is required to be in the neonatal unit for several weeks, it sounds like. And Doireann is explaining that scenario and going through it in quite a lot of detail about how the only thing she brought to the hospital with her was Evelyn Dove's poem, and how she read it when she was waiting to see her baby, to feed her baby. And the milking parlor refers to the nickname of the place where all the moms who had their babies in the neonatal unit would go to pump their milk so that the babies can have their milk, even though they're hooked up to tubes and in incubators and all those things. So this one was less about the poem and more about her experience doing that. And it was, the way it was described, it really seemed like a very transformative experience for her. It kind of changed her perspective on birth and mothering, because she had 3 fairly uneventful natural births before her daughter was born, and then she went through this rather more traumatic and dangerous situation with her daughter. So it inevitably transformed her view of mothering and changed the way she perceived her milk donations that she had been talking about in the previous chapters. So yeah, that was chapter 4. Hi. So chapter 5 is an unscientific mishmash. And this one covers the kind of aftermath of Doireann's birth and raising her young daughter and getting the rhythm of getting back into the rest of her mom life with her sons and her daughter happening. But it also is the beginning of her giving herself permission to research the poem and to research Evelyn Dove more thoroughly. And she gives herself permission to start driving to different parts of Ireland where Evelyn was, and to gather all her information into folders and actually not care that she is not doing this in like a typical scholarly way that would happen in academia, but she's just doing this research the way she can based on her circumstances and her passion for the subject. And I found this chapter really inspiring because of that. And I especially loved this line from page 72 that says, "This is the life I have made for myself, always striving for something beyond my grasp, while hauling implausibly complex armfuls." So I like that idea that and I can really relate to that as a mother and as a human who is pursuing artistic desires while also, ingraining the mundane into my life, that you just have to accept that you're not going to be able to do this work in a way that seems perfect, or in a way that seems acceptable from outside society. Because if you look at the way a masculine approach, like the patriarchal approach would be to something like this, it would be like going on a fellowship or going on a residency and researching and spending hours in the library and talking to experts and doing it all in this very specific way. And that's just not accessible to someone who's raising children and who is doing this without the credentials that the patriarchy or a hierarchical system would have given her. And so I really love that she's describing that in this chapter, and she's saying, I'm not going to do this in the scientific way, in the proper way. I'm going to do it in the way that my passion and that my heart is telling me I need to do it for myself. So I really love that chapter. Hello. Okay, I read chapter 6 earlier today, and chapter 6, it was interesting. It definitely felt a bit different from the other chapters. It had a different cadence and a different way of telling the story. So 6 was called the dissection room, and it talks about a premonitory dream that Doireann has about being in an actual dissection room in a medical university. So she wanted to be a dentist when she was a child, and she tells you all about that. And she tells you about going to university, about those first weeks, about what ended up happening with her university career. And then she tells you about the subsequent times that she went back to university and ended up going into that room. And it becomes a bit of a strange little mini obsession with her to be in this space and to go back to this room, and she can't understand why she's dreaming about it, and it just kind of sits with her. And then for most of that, I was thinking, how does this connect to the poem? But she does tie it in very, very small little mention at the end of the chapter about what this section of her life has to do with the poem. And so I thought that was interesting and clever. And, you learn more about her and her life, and how she's connected all these little moments and parts of her life to this particular poem. Hi, so I have finished chapter 7, which is called Cold Lips to Cold Lips. And this chapter was really lovely. What Doireann does in this chapter is she starts to piece together the story of Evelyn Dove and her life. And she was a twin, and so she pieces together what she can of her early life, being sent off to be a wet nurse to a woman, so she doesn't really grow up around her other siblings, and then how she comes back to her home and how she's married off and she's widowed quite early, and about her twin sister and what her twin sister's choices were versus what Evelyn's choices were. And Evelyn was actually nicknamed Nellie. And it was such an immersive and fun feeling to be transported to this, 18th century world and to read Doireann's imaginings of what Evelyn's early life was like. So I really enjoyed this chapter, and it really describes how her and Art Lagahair get together, and how they meet and how they kind of have love at first sight sort of situation. And it's about her desire, and Doireann also talks about her own obsession really with the poem and with finding out more about Evelyn Dove's life. And she gets wrapped up in that and talks about how, she would not shower, she would, avoid other things, other self-care things, because she wanted to take every spare moment that she had to indulge this passion of learning about this life. And I really appreciate that. I think the passion of that and the desire in that is something that I really admire, and something that I often wish I could do. And I just don't have, I guess, my enough I can't turn off certain parts of me, like certain parts of sleep that I need, certain elements of self-care that I like have always preserved really strongly. So when I do find a passion and when I do get immersed in something that I want to pursue, I actually usually like hamper that down quite well. And so to learn about Doireann and how she didn't hamper it down and she went for it, I find that quite compelling, and I find it quite it's just really enjoyable to read. It puts a smile on my face. I don't know how else to articulate the way it makes me feel, but I definitely am still very immersed in this book, and I can't wait to learn more about the story behind the poem. Hi everybody. Chapter 8 was called Oubliette. Pretty short chapter, and it is about Doireann's experience with her daughter, naming her daughter, and then seeing the spirit of her daughter. I feel like there's a kind of reading between the lines message that it's trying to convey, which is kind of like how women are trained and to be good, and she was also talking about like the way she feels compelled as a mother to feminize her daughter, and it's a compulsion she never felt with her sons. And so kind of this interesting idea of mothers, daughters, femininity, and the kind of conditioning of femininity, I think is what she's talking about. She doesn't really get into any Evelyn Douve stuff in here in that chapter. So that's chapter 8. Hey everyone. Okay, I finished chapter 9, Blood and Mud. And this chapter was fantastic. It is it's sad, but it's fantastic. This is how Art Lagaher, Evelyn Douve's husband, is murdered. And it describes so beautifully this, sets up the picture of their family life and then the eventual dispute that goes between Art and this other man that is recorded in history. But of course, all there is 2 versions of the story from either of them, so we don't really know what really happened. But he was murdered, and the horse that he was on goes back to the house. And when Evelyn sees the horse, she knows that Art has been injured, and so she jumps on the horse and goes to him, and the horse takes her to him. But by the time she gets there, he's dead. And it is just an evocative description of this, beautifully rendered, and I just love Doireann's kind of obsession with this poem and her like dedication to trying to get the story right. She's doing such a great job of making me understand why she finds it so important and compelling, and why she's so obsessed with it. And I think that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted her to share with me. It's exactly the level of being wrapped up in the story that I wanted. I wanted her passion, her dedication to this poem. So really, really enjoying it. Hey everyone. Okay, we have been inundated with snow today, so it's very very quiet. The snow is making everything very quiet, and muted outside, but it's also just the West Coast is not equipped to deal with snow like this, and when it dumps, it's just debilitating. So I'm checking in about chapter 10, which is called Two Roads Each Blurred. And there's kind of two sections to this chapter. The first, and it's both, they're both incidents that happened on the roads. It was interesting to hear Doireann talk about the darkness in Ireland on the roads. She didn't go into it like explicitly explaining it, but she was talking about the danger of stopping on the roads in the night and the lack of light. So I think that these are rural roads where there's not a lot of there's no street lights to keep things illuminated. So the first one is an incident that happened with her husband when they were driving home from a date, and they came upon what they perceived as an accident, or there were cars stopped and lights flashing, and there was a woman lying in the road kind of writhing around. And it was actually really beautifully illustrated to me that what I love about her writing is that she has this subtle way of explaining these feminist situations, these reactions of being a woman that a man wouldn't necessarily have. So I won't explain all the details of the situation because that kind of is, like you should read the book to hear them. But her overall, this overall thing that I took from it was that she felt very torn between doing something instinctual that she felt was necessary to help the situation, and then doing the thing that is the safest for her and her husband in that moment. So it was a really interesting contrast. And then the second one is when she's driving to her hometown to do a poetry reading by herself, and she is kind of witness to and kind of inadvertently a car accident where two cars have collided, and somehow as she's driving through, she's able to get through without being hurt, and she calls to report the incident, and then is told to continue on, to not stay there, and then her reaction to that, and how that is a different reaction from the first scenario. So this one has no specific relation to Evelyn Dubh, but it's very interesting. I really like the contrast she has between her own experiences and explaining this poem, and it feels very intricately woven, even if it doesn't directly relate. There's just something in there that is that is this amazing tapestry is being created of all these scenarios. It's like different colors, strands of thread, different ideas, different scenarios, but somehow they all make sense together for me. So that was chapter 10. Okay, hi. I finished Blot, which is chapter 11. And this is the aftermath of Art Legohair's death. And it seems that Evelyn Dubh made some very extreme decisions when her husband died. I don't want to go into what they were because I think that's something you can discover when you're reading this chapter. But it also deals with the aftermath of the person that murdered Art and his life and what happened to him. And then it talks about the letters of Evelyn's brothers, which is how the historical record is kept of Evelyn's life. And you can only infer what's going on with her through those letters. That's the only historical record that's left of that time. And so the last time she's mentioned in their letters is when she's 48. She was kind of ostracized from the family because of her marriage to Art. And it seems like despite people trying to advocate on her behalf for the family to support her, they didn't. And that's pretty much what this chapter is. This chapter pretty much covers, oh, and then it covers also Doireann's attempts at getting into Raleigh House, which is the house that used to belong to the Doves, and she really wanted to go there and be in Evelyn's house. And the current owner was like, I don't want you coming in my house. It's my private house. I'm not interested in you walking through it. And Doireann was really, really persistent and still was not able to get in. And so she felt kind of guilty about that, about how much she pushed to get into the house. So that was chapter 11. Hey y'all, so chapter 12 is called Omen of Plains and Starlings. And in this one, Doireann relates her experience of having this recurring dream while she was pregnant with her daughter. And if you'll remember from earlier chapters, her placenta was deteriorating. It was not thriving as the baby got larger. And she kept having this recurring dream about an airplane kind of crash. And she feels like that was her body trying to tell her what was happening, but obviously she couldn't connect the dots there. And luckily, through medical intervention, she was able to, her daughter survived and everything was okay in the end. And then she's also talking about starlings as omens for foretold for different things. So I think the fire, the London fire, was something that people said an afterthought, that there were all these murmurs of starlings that were like foretelling this fire perhaps. And then she ends this chapter, it's a really short little chapter, with talking about Nori Singleton, or also Honoria Singleton, who was the first person to write down Evelyn Doubb's poem. And so that she relates those kind of three things together through this idea of omens. And that is chapter 12. Hello. So I read today chapter 13, To Splinter the Surface. And this one moves through a few different ideas around, again, the repetition of some of women's tasks. So like putting clothing on the line. Also, Doireann visits Evelyn's mother's house, the house that Evelyn grew up in. So that is a really moving experience for her, and she finds this little shard of pottery of dish that she takes home with her. And she also talks about this interesting phenomena of pregnancy where these cells, that some of the cells from the baby move out of the baby into the mother and stay there. And so she kind of talks about this in relation to Mare, who was Evelyn's mother, and how they remained connected despite being estranged later in life. And that was chapter 13. Hello. Chapter 14, now, comma then. Talking about weaning her daughter from breastfeeding, and at the same time contrasting that with some scenes from her childhood and the connection that she had with the home she grew up in and the lineage of women that came before her in that home. I identified with quite a bit of things in this chapter because she talks about playing in a hayloft as a child, which I also did growing up on a farm. And I think there's a really unique level of experience that happens in something like that. So I really appreciated that. And I've also weaned 2 children. So I also really identified with that process, although she was much more sentimental about that process than I was. I feel like when I weaned my children, I was very much ready to wean them, and I felt very limited amounts of sad about it. And she even contemplates like being pregnant again and going through the process again, having a new baby to feed. And that was just not really, other than the first time I weaned in order to have my second child. After the second one, I was like so glad to be putting that step of parenting behind me. So kind of a different overall experience, but I definitely appreciated reading her thoughts about it. And I think she accurately described the impact that breastfeeding has on your body. Oh, she also described a breast cancer scare in this one. So weaning made her breasts change, and that allowed her to notice some lumps that were in one of her breasts. So that was a really important part of the narrative of that chapter as well. So it's interesting. I don't think that this book is like, there is a feminist aspect to this book for sure, but I wouldn't really necessarily call it a feminist text, which someone commented when I talked on my TBR when I talked about reading this book. I would say this text is much more female, and she says that a lot. This is a female text. This is a female narrative, and it's very female. There are people who don't identify as female who can have these experiences with child rearing, but for me, the whole aura of this story is very female, and I think that anyone could appreciate it, but I think that as a female, I definitely identify strongly with a lot of the themes that she's exploring in this book. So I'll check in again after another chapter. Alrighty, so I have gotten to chapter 15, which is called A Sequence of Shadows. Oh gosh, let me find it here. So this one was very much, yes, A Sequence of Shadows. This chapter was very much about the rest of Doireann's research around Evelyn Douve and trying to find her, and trying to like scour as many historical records as she could to try to determine what happened to her, because the research that she could find already done only went so far. So she kind of traces all the men, her sons and her grandsons, as far as she can, and comes up with some, just some interesting tidbits about the research that she was able to do. And it was really quite sad because Evelyn's son wrote a little like self-biography in a Bible, which she ended up finding the documentation to, and in the end he never mentioned his mother. So it was super disappointing for her when she was doing this research to have all these dead ends for a lot of the things. And really that's what chapter 15 is about. It's just like going into details about the different sons and grandsons and the different lengths that Doireann went to when she was trying to discover more about Evelyn's life. And I think what is really interesting is that she was just like, I love the fact that we're traveling through this research with her, and the way she's sharing it, and the way her, you know, her interest and her desire developed around the poem, and then Eileen Dove herself was just super interesting. So yeah, really close to finishing. I think I'm going to try to finish it today. So there's 2 more chapters, and then the poem itself, or the Keen itself. So I will check in a bit. All right, everybody, I finished A Ghost in the Throat, and walking you through the last few chapters were I believe 16 wild bees and their fizzy curiosities, which kind of goes back to Doireann's way that she's she's sharing some different snippets of life and relating them to different ways that she's making a home and different ways that her life is progressing. I really enjoyed throughout this book the way she tells the stories of her life. She, obviously, being a poet, she has quite a poetic sense about her, but she's also so good at evoking different imagery. So she's talking about moving into this new house that they purchased, and the garden, and how the garden, she wants to fill the garden with bees, and she wants to plant plants that are going to bring the bees. And then she also talks about her husband deciding that he felt that 4 children was enough for them, but she was still very much on the fence about that and wanted to have more children. But he was like, no, this is important to me. I really want to get a vasectomy, and I want us to be done with children. And so she kind of had to process that through him. And one of the things I loved about the last chapter was that she was able to come through those feelings and let go of those feelings of a new baby through the discovery of her interest in Evelyn Douve, and like how she could birth this book essentially through letting go of birthing babies. And I very much again related to that as a creative person myself. And you know, I felt a very clear delineation between the time that I was having my sons when they were young, and I had birthed my second son, and 2 years later when I had weaned him, and I felt this sense of, okay, I'm done with making babies. This is a phase of my life that I'm ready to let go of, and now I'm ready to really put my energy, my personal energy, into my art career. And so I feel like Doireann got there as well, but in kind of a another way, and she struggled with accepting that, but then did. And then the book ends with the Keen. So you get the Keen written out with the Irish and the English translation, and I would assume that this is, you know, Doireann's translation of the text. So I thought this was fantastic, a 5-star read for me. I could see myself going back to this in the future, and kind of, you know, it speaks to a very specific time in Doireann's life, at a very specific time that I could relate to in my own life. But I also just love being taken through another creative, artistic person's interests, especially because this interest was in an actual person, and a woman, and there were many levels on which she related to Evelyn Dove, and also she could connect her life. And so I just thought it was really well done, and I really, really enjoyed it. So that is the end of this deep dive reading vlog. I hope it's given you a really good overview of this book, so that you can tell if it would be something you would be interested in reading. And I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.